Welcome to the West Ham Voice. Thank you for joining me. If you're new to the channel, please do hit the subscribe, like, and bell notifications to let you know when I'm next on. It certainly helps the channel to grow, etc. So if you like what you see, if you like what you hear, please do that. So, what am I going to talk about this morning? Well, apart from all the transfer rumours that are going on at the moment, I think the main thing that needs to be discussed is this relationship between Tim Steidten and David Moyes. I mean, we're beginning to hear an awful lot of stuff out on social media about their working relationship or the lack of it. For those of you who watch my channel regularly, you know that I always try to be that half glass full type of person, to always try and find positives in what's going on and to try and give reasoned argument as to why things happen at West Ham in the way they do. So when we hear of a senior source suggesting that Tim Steidten finds David Moyes, quote, very hard work, unquote, then you know that perhaps your worst fears that the Moyes Steidten relationship might be a little bit dysfunctional, what we all kind of feared. I asked a friend, person who knows more than I do, who's a lot closer to the club, if that quote was true. The quote of, Moyes is very hard work. And he came back and he said, senior source confirmed that. So it's no wonder that there have been stories flying around that Steidten might walk away from his post that he's only confirmed in just over 3 weeks ago. Now, having said that, I've also been told that Steidten isn't walking away. It's highly unlikely to happen. However, it is the senior source who should be dealing with this and finding a way for the two men to work together if there is indeed disharmony or disagreement between them. Or, for all we know, this may just all be social media rumor, and there may be an agreeable working arrangement between the two men anyway. And I'll come to my theory about that in a moment. Look, all this started off with a podcast and subsequent tweet from 90 Minutes Football, where it was discussed that Steidten could walk away, and it was retweeted by a number of West Ham social media Twitter accounts. And the tweet went like this: there's a chance that Tim Steidten walks away from his role at West Ham due to the lack of agreement on the club's transfer activity. Now, I also read another article, which was an interesting one, which was from a Twitter handle called West Ham United Scout. Now, I think he's a little bit more sort of pragmatic in his approach rather than the sensationalist 90-minute approach, where he said, for me, it's a no-brainer that the club have to side with the new appointment, Steidten. For far too many years, we've made very poor decisions in the transfer market. This is our golden ticket that we cannot afford to pass up. We have the oldest squad in the league, a wage structure which doesn't reflect the players' worth on the pitch. We are now approaching the opening game of the season, Bournemouth in August 12th, and the only team in the league without any new signings, which we are at this moment in time. Add to that, we don't have a club captain. We have a depleted coaching staff, Warburton leaving, Nevin joining Strasbourg, etc. Not to mention some disgruntled players who want to leave for one reason or another. He goes on to say, I personally feel it's time for the board to pass control over to Steidten, back the man with a proven record, allow him to make the signings he believes will work for us long term. If Moyes can't adapt and get on board with the new structure, then unfortunately it will be time to say thank you for everything you've done for the club, and we're going in a new direction now. And then he asks, let him know what your thoughts are, etc. It's a really good write-up, and do look out for the Twitter handle West Ham United Scout, which I thought was really good. So after reading those, after seeing the 90-minute one, I kind of agree with a lot of what West Ham United Scout says. But for me, I want to kind of take this another level, because you see, a technical director doesn't only get involved in transfers. Yes, that's certainly a large part of a technical director's role. But I had to scramble back to my video that I did 3 weeks ago when I was welcoming Steidten to West Ham, to remind myself what attracted this talented technical director at West Ham in the first place. And in that show, I expanded on the role of a technical director. You see, in addition to transfer involvement, Uh, uh, it's kind of like a technical director can oversee things like signing of coaches, oversees the academy, the development squad, even the women's squads, look after overall strategy of the footballing side of things, and give the club a sense of direction for the future. And above all, he would be responsible for identifying a new coach for West Ham United when Moyes leaves at the end of this season, if not sooner. So this is why I don't think Steidten is going to leave anytime soon. I think, I think West Ham scout said it in a good way. I think 90 minutes kind of sensationalized this. Look, for me, Steiden's role at West Ham United is going to grow as the season progresses. He'll have a much bigger say in the running of the future of this club and also the future direction of it. That direction is likely to look much closer to the working model that a club like Brighton currently has in place. The direction that Brighton have adopted is that of bringing in young, talented players, nurturing them, not being afraid to sell their best players to bigger clubs, and then promoting those young talents into the vacant roles available in the squad. Kind of almost ready-made replacements for the players that they've sold for big sums of money. Man City have got a strategy very different. Their strategy is when they recruit the brightest young talent from around the world, they then make a fortune on selling these young players on before they even become regulars in Man City's squad. So and in the last two transfer windows for Man City, they've made more money in youth player sales than we got for Declan Rice for the Declan Rice sale. But I guess it's a point I'm trying to make. As far as West Ham's concerned, we don't have a strategy. We don't have that kind of ethos that Brighton have, or Man City have, or some other clubs have as well. The kind of the Red Bull approach and stuff like that. As far as West Ham are concerned, we do not seem to have direction that could be deemed anything like that of Brighton. We have in the past recruited players who are well past their best, or recruited players who don't fit into a system, the system that we play. You only have to look at what happened when Pellegrini was sacked. Moyes came back for his second spell at the club and systematically dismantled the team that Pellegrini had spent an awful lot of money putting together. There was no consistency in our approach, and then we jumped from one manager's system to another manager's system. And I dare say, when Moyes leaves, we're probably going to end up jumping again to yet another manager's system. But this is where Steidten comes in to stop this inconsistency and to ensure that no matter who comes in to coach West Ham United, we have an established infrastructure in place so that there is a consistency and a more fluid handover from coach to coach. Now, you've only got to look at Brighton again and see how that worked when Robert De Zerbi took over from Graham Potter. He not only inherited a squad that Potter and technical director David Weir and previous technical director Dan Ashworth created, but he also went on to improve Brighton's performances because of the infrastructure that was already there to help him succeed. And I think this is where Steiden's role really is the bigger picture. Yes, there may be some pain to go through in this summer's transfer window, which may be David Moyes' last transfer interaction at West Ham. But the bigger picture for Steidten is here to do what goes beyond transfers. Hence why I don't believe for a moment that he's going to walk away from this job. So what strategy does Moyes have, and has he improved us since his second spell at the club? Well, some might say yes, sixth place finish, seventh place finish, winners of a European trophy, all that sort of stuff, making Europe 3 years in a row, 3 seasons in a row. But then when we look at Moyes, what Moyes has done in the number of transfer windows since he's been at West Ham, you could argue that it's all been a little bit hit and miss. Moyes seems to have flitted from one transfer approach to another. And again, you might argue, if you want to look at the positive, that he keeps changing his transfer policy according to the needs of the squad at the time. And that might be a generous appraisal of the situation. When Moyes first returned to West Ham United, he had to get players in that were grafters, people that are players that were runners, grafting throughout the whole 90 minutes. When he returned, we had the lowest return rate in player output, which is why we were struggling to win games at the time. Moyes got players in like Souček and Bowen who would run and graft, and it worked. But then perhaps, and rightly so, after that, after avoiding relegation, and then the following season getting a sixth finish place, Moyes started to have bigger ideas about the types of players that he wanted at the club. He even was interviewed about it, and he talked about it, about going the next level up. And in January 2022, in the transfer window, he wanted players like Calvin Phillips, at the time, who was arguably on par with Declan Rice, while he was at Leeds. But Phillips didn't want to leave Leeds for West Ham. He also wanted players like Darwin Núñez. If you remember him, he was chasing him in that January transfer window, who was phenomenal goal scorer for Benfica at the time, 85 games, 48 goals. But Liverpool came calling with a massive fee, and his fate was sealed. And in that same window, Moyes also wanted players like Luis Diaz of Porto. But again, Liverpool came knocking on the door for him as well. And then, as I mentioned in a show recently, he also started to look at last summer, other players, that he wanted to kind of, next level up, improve the squad. Players like Filip Kostic, who eventually signed for Juventus. Calvin Phillips again, who then was at Man City. Now, the interesting thing with all these players that Moyes was after were that they were all from abroad. Diaz, Núñez, Kostic, etc. However, with what happened in the Premier League last season, Moyes seems to have had a knee-jerk reaction and has now decided that the only players he wants are with Premier League proven experience. I get that in a way. It's understandable. We've just sold Declan Rice to another Premier League team. Moyes probably thinks he has a decent enough squad to do well in the Europa League next season, which ironically he built last summer. And now perhaps he's thinking, well, I think I've got Europe sorted, but I need to focus on Premier League again so that we don't get involved in another stressful relegation battle. So I get it. I understand where he's coming from. But Moyes also might feel he's had his fingers burnt when we look at players from abroad over the last few seasons. For him, they haven't delivered. Haller, Anderson, Blasic, who was his own signing, and so on. The only overseas players that have survived have been the likes of Soucek, Soufal, Fornals, all workhorses. Certainly Fornals came in as a flair player. He ended up being a bit of a tracker, a midfield tracker, etc., doing the donkey work that Moyes appreciates in a footballer. So with all that, Moyes is going for players with Premier League experience, but there's a price to pay, with Gallagher being priced at up to 50 million, Ward-Prowse anything between 25 to 40 million, McTominay around 45 million, and so on. But is Moyes really going to get his own way and have West Ham United spend all the Declan Rice money on overpriced Premier League players? Well, I said earlier, I have a theory where Steidten does have an input into how our transfer business is shaping up. I can't believe for a moment that West Ham will blow all the Rice money on older players. And to the outside world, our transfer targets look a scattergun approach. But I wonder if that scattergun looks that way because the players we're targeting are a combination of Moyes' targets and Steidten's targets that both men have agreed on. I think the transfer kitty in some sort of way is going to be shared between the two men, where we'll get a mix of Premier League experience, but we will also get some younger players in as well. As I said it the other day, right now our priorities are two midfielders and a central defender. Of course, if any other player leaves, then we'll replace them accordingly, like Aaron Creswell at left back, who's at the moment the only other player that's destined to be leaving West Ham if West Ham can agree a fee with Wolves. Yes, I know there's the whole Scamacca thing, and that keeps rumbling on. But as I've said before, I think the only way West Ham United are going to sell Scamacca or let Scamacca go is if a club comes in and either pays the full price for him, 30 odd million pounds, or as near as damn it, or agrees to a loan deal with a cast iron obligation to buy the player for, again, 30 million pounds. Now, I know Roma have said that they'll bid, 4 million to take him on loan. And then they'll end up paying 17 million for him as an obligation to buy. That ain't going to do it. That ain't going to hack it. So if they come in and say 4 million and then we'll give you another 25 million at the end of the season, then that might happen. So we've also heard that West Ham have agreed to make bids on 6 targets. And I'm beginning to believe that these 6 targets are a mix of players between Moyes, Steidten, and even Rob Newman. So who are the 6 that we've apparently targeted? Well, 4 are the midfielders, central midfielders. There's, of course, Ward-Prowse, who undoubtedly is a Moyes target. There's no denying that. Then there's Conor Gallagher. Could be agreed that that's an agreement, a target between Moyes and Steidten. He fits the criteria that Moyes wants when it comes to Premier League experience, but then he also fits the criteria that Steidten would be looking for. A younger player, good stats, etc., etc. Now, having said all that, it looks like we won't be pursuing Gallagher anymore as a target from this point on because, he said he wants to stay at Chelsea. The Chelsea manager wants to keep him, etc., etc. So it looks like that one is a non-goer. Now, apparently, West Ham have been offered Callum Hudson-Odoi as an alternative, but I'm not so sure neither Moyes nor Steidten would make him a priority, and I doubt he was one of the 6 original targets that we've apparently put bids in for. There's also Scott McTominay. Could be a player that both men, again, have agreed to. Reasonable age, 26 years of age, decent player. All right, he's not going to pull up any trees, but he's okay. Decent age, Premier League experience. But I would imagine that maybe Steiden's thinking that someone like Edson Alvarez or even Yusuf Fofana would be more preferential targets. And when it comes to Alvarez, he's been a target apparently since early June. We approached him as early as the day after the Conference League final was played. But the holdup there is down to agents and their demands. Now, it's possible that Alvarez may have been targeted by Steidten during his gardening leave from Bayer Leverkusen. And the fact that we have been linked to him as far back as June suggests that both Moyes and Steidten would agree on this player as well. If we cannot come to a reasonable agreement on a price for McTominay, then I think we might be pursuing our interest in Alvarez and apparently Yusuf Fofana as well. I think Fofana is probably third choice defensive midfield target after McTominay and Alvarez. And the other 2 players that we understand our bids have been put in for are Carlos Borges. We've been hearing this for the past 2 weeks, that the deal's nearly done. Now, he would indeed be an approved Steidten type of player, but we're led to believe that it was Rob Newman who originally identified him as a target. And the 6th player, again another Steidten type player, is Adrian TRUFFERT of Rennes, the left back who I've spoken about before. With the imminent departure of Cresswell, as mentioned earlier, TRUFFERT is likely to be most likely to be the replacement. So I know there have been other names that have been added to the long list of players that we've been linked to. I think 24-year-old Chelsea central defender Trevor Chalobah has been added. Juventus 19-year-old left winger Samuel Iling Jr. And Spezia right back Emil Holm. Now, the Chalobah link is plausible, I guess. We need a central defender to cover for the players that we currently have. And the names mentioned before so far are Harry Maguire, whose salary would be prohibitive unless Man United heavily subsidise a move. And we've also had a link with Jonathan Tah, but his link is mainly because of the connection to Steidten and Bayer Leverkusen. But as you can see, again, there's a mixture here of players. So we're putting in bids for players, some which look like obvious Steidten targets and some which look like obvious David Moyes targets. Look, there's no denying Harry Maguire is an obvious Moyes target, but Bayer Leverkusen's Tah and possibly Chalobah could be someone that maybe Steidten has identified. The Ealing Jr. link is a bit weird because if the deal for Borges happens, then I can't see that materialising. And as for Holm, we need to get our essential positions filled: midfield, central defence, and left back when Cresswell goes. So I doubt a right back would be an essential requirement right now, but you never know. So there's my theory. I think, possibly we keep hearing the same thing over and over again, that, these 2 men are not working closely together. It's a problem and so on and so forth. But I don't know, I think, as I said, Steiden's got a much bigger role to play and that will happen over time. And I think there is some kind of mutual agreement on targets. It looks like certain targets, which are obvious David Moyes targets, have been bid for. And I think what will happen is they'll systematically go through those. And then if those targets aren't materializing, either because they're too expensive, etc., then there is an open requirement to look at the likes of Alvarez. Like I said, Alvarez has been a target since June, and the only thing holding that back is the agent fees. Right, that's it. I don't know what you think. I know there's going to continue to be an awful lot of rumor that there's a lot of discord going on in the background, etc. Who knows? I think maybe, sometimes things are embellished on social media. I'm not saying it's a match made in heaven, without a shadow of a doubt. It's not, but I'm not so sure it's quite as bad as people seem to make out. And I think the proof is going to be in the players that we eventually do sign. Anyway, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Do hit the subscribe, like, and bell notification to let you know when I'm next on. And I will see you all again very soon.